Coming up on UGTV, Standing Committee Meetings of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. A meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. This will be followed by a meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee.
All applicants are current on their taxes and have no code violations. We'll go through those rather quickly. We have a yard extension for 23 South 11th Street. It's the property here in red. The applicant is here at 1024 Lowell. 3405 Longwood Avenue is the land bank in red. Applicant is 3401 Longwood. Another yard extension, 228 North Mill. And the applicant is next door at 232 South Mill, and that should be 228 South Mill, my bad. Yard extension, 1607 North 49th Street, indicated in red. Applicant to the south, 1601 North 49th Street. Yard extension of 736 Quindaro in red, and the applicant at 734 Quindaro. We have a property acquisition at 49 South 16th, which is located here in red. The applicant is the owner of 43, 45, and 47 South 16th Street. Another yard extension for 2559 Cissna, with the applicant being at 2557 Cissna. A yard extension and property acquisition. These are actually two properties, 2737 Waverly and 2127 North 29th, with the applicant being at 2127 is the applicant, 2125 is the land bank lot. A yard extension and property acquisition. The applicant is here at 1217 Ann, and here is 1215, and on the other side is 1219. Yard extension of 202 North 13th Street here in red, the applicant at 200 North 13th Street. And we have a property acquisition for this property here, 1116R Douglas Avenue. One of the applicants their home is here off Lawrence, and they own this property here, 1116 Douglas. We also have an application from Mr. O'Brien, who resides at 1640 South Baltimore Street. Both are interested in the property here. The advisory board has reviewed those applications. And really, we have the two for the Douglas, so, and since we can't award it to both, I can answer any questions on that property if needed, or any of the other properties we have.
Are there any questions from any commissioners? Commissioner Townsend?
Just so I'm clear, with the two blue in the lower left-hand corner, the property being purchased is the larger section, and the applicant, one of the applicants who seeks to buy it, is to the left of that in a smaller?
Yes, the property outlined in red is the 1116R. Mm-hmm. One of the applicants, this is their house, and they also own this property here.
Okay. In
blue, and then we went ahead and made green the other applicant, which is over here.
Okay, it's the highlighted property in red that's
yes.
Before us. Okay.
Commissioner McKiernan?
Mr. Slaughter.
Yes.
The property on Ann Avenue, the two properties on Ann,
1217, you said, is the address of the existing house. Does the applicant live at 1217? Because LandsWeb would indicate the applicant doesn't, and I thought the applicant had to live at the property if they were going to ask for a yard extension.
The applicant just has to be the owner.
The owner of the property. Do we know, is this property rental licensed?
I do not have that information.
Is the applicant here this evening?
Yes, he is here.
Can he come forward to the podium in the center of the room, please? And Mr. Slaughter, while he's coming up, you said that, well, wait a minute, you said that everything here is tax current and there's no history of code violations on these properties.
Correct. There's no current code violations.
Do we have a history of code violations on this address? Is that, okay, I can see that it is. And so you are Mr. Hernandez?
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez, so is this a rental property?
No, I'm going to live there, but it's on the side of the house. It's only 3 feet, and there's no backyard. There's almost nothing on the back. I'm going to live there. I'm gonna just get it for my kids can play and all that.
So did you recently acquire this property?
I just bought it like 3 months ago, and I'm going to move there.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. I have no further questions about that property.
No more questions. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve. Wait a minute. Do we have anything we need to resolve before we?
We need to have a we need to resolve this. We have 2 applicants. So we would need you guys to recommend or approve one, and then we would have to deny the other to move forward to the Board of Trustees.
Well, why don't I accept that as a motion to approve all but this one, and then we'll come back and vote on it separately?
If that's a motion, this is a second.
Okay. So, would the clerk please read the roll regarding all the properties under application except the ones identified here on Douglas and Baltimore?
Roll call. Bynum?
Aye.
Murguia?
Aye.
Townsend?
Aye.
McKiernan?
Aye.
Walker?
Aye.
And I will state that both applicants are in attendance tonight.
Who's paying the most money?
They would both be offered the same price.
Commissioner Murguia? Your district, isn't it?
Yes, it's my district, but I tell you, what's the committee's recommendation? I don't know either of these people, and
If our recommendation is needed, our recommendation would be solely on that the property owner to the south. I mean, that would be our recommendation, just based on the adjacentness of the 2 properties.
okay. Oh, I'd move to approve staff's recommendation.
Second.
That would be the request of Patrick Petrali.
Someone's asking.
You want to come forward, sir?
Yes, I would. Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know who had their hand up first. One of you go up, come up, and then.
Thank you. This has been a long process. Last April,
What's your name, please?
my name is Mark O'Brien,
Okay.
and I'm to the northeast there. I've been there 56 years. My folks moved in 1940, And of April of last year, I was approved of the property to the north of the 11 R. Douglas, and was pending approval by the Public Works Department. I put a call in back then and have been waiting ever since. And I just happened to look into the other property a couple months ago. Well, actually, I put a request into the delinquent property back in 12/14 with 11R and never received any correspondence. I happened to go up there in October and learned that it was being turned over to the land bank, and they had never informed the land bank or I of that change of that situation. Now, on the prior, what I was speaking of from April of 16, as I said, I never heard back from Public Works, and that process never went forward. Had it gone forward, the properties to the north of that would have been in my possession. So that's kind of the quandary where I'm in.
Is this the case where it came in front of us, Chris, and I asked Public Works to look at the situation with the underground springs?
Correct.
No, it was the erosion problem. A worry about erosion. If there was overcutting, there would be some problems with erosion. It was approved pending Public Works follow through on regarding and addressing any concerns on that.
And is this the ground, Chris, that we're talking about tonight?
No, that property in question is here to the west.
There's like 6 lots, 6
Yeah.
parcels that is directly adjacent to me.
Property tonight it was in the tax sale in August, and it just came into our inventory, I think November 9th.
And that was the property that Public Works was supposed to look at?
Not this Douglas property. The property they were supposed to look at were the several here. I believe it's
And did that get done?
not, I was never notified of what they found.
Had it been done, I would have acquired it by now.
Okay, so on the current property that's up, this is the first time we've seen this, correct?
Correct. It just came to us last month.
Okay.
How many acres are we talking about, Mr. Slade?
On tonight's property, a little over 5. On the 5 parcels I requested last year, just under 4. And I've got 3.7 where I live right now.
It's all timber
It's all timber.
and rocks
We want to keep it that way.
and hills.
Well, the other gentleman, do you have anything else to add why we should?
Other than that, I put a request in last December and was never notified on the current property, the 5 acres.
So, Chris, can we move that along one way or the other on the property that we delayed?
We would still be willing to sell that other property to Mr. O'Brien. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Just the property that we addressed last year.
Right.
Just to the north of the one that we're currently considering, correct?
Correct, yes, and to the west of the highlighted green. This is like one big, and I believe there's properties there on that other side.
There's actually 5. One's a 1.8, on the west side is 1.8, and there's like another 5 parcels, lots divvied up on the east side of that, so like 6.
Since we've heard from Mr. O'Brien, is it possible to hear from the other applicant as well? Oh, okay.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you.
Hello. I'm Patrick, and this is Stephanie, Carla, and Lele. We live in the house to the west. We bought our house actually around the property. It was something that got us there, and we have a little trail that we cut through. like Mark, it's our sanctuary. It's not a very developable spot. It's 70 feet in elevation down. I was also interested in the properties that he has an application in to the north. I'm no longer, after meeting him, as long as one of us ties this up, I'm still interested in the property that we're talking about today. I did put a notice in for it to go to auction. I went to auction and got outbid, and I talked to the guy who outbid me, and he didn't realize that it was landlocked. He was cutting through my property to get to it, 1116. And his idea was to put an ATV track back there, and me and Mark are just both thankful that's not happening today. It's kind of like both of our sanctuaries. Yeah, our property touches it. Eventually, we'd like to get it zoned agriculturally and put in some housing to possibly sell, or a barn. This is kind of our 10-year plan. Stephanie, Lily.
So, Chris, just for clarity for everyone, let's go over it again. So, Mr. Patrick, do you say your last name? Petrelli?
Petrelli, yes.
Petrelli. Mr. Petrelli lives where?
Right there,
And what property does he currently own besides that square?
the one outlined in blue,
Outlined in blue. Mr. O'Brien lives where?
here in the green.
And he owns all the property around the green? Within the green border?
He could if we go ahead and honor the sale from last year.
No, I just mean within the green border, that's all.
Everything within the green border, yes.
Okay,
He currently lives there.
Yes.
and he currently lives there.
All right.
And then the two parcels, the two red parcels, which parcel are we talking about tonight?
This one, just only this one.
Okay. And then the upper parcel is the one Mr. O'Brien was talking about, correct?
Correct.
So with that in mind, they seem like both good applicants. You all, since you're talking about, you've been speaking to Mr. O'Brien, I assume that you all are good neighbors to each other.
We just met tonight.
Oh.
Officially.
You should know your neighbors. You live right next door to each other. Okay, so this is a tough one. They both seem like good applicants, and they both meet the criteria. So I'd make a motion that we move Mr. O'Brien's property forward that we deterred him from at the last meeting, which is directly behind his property. And then we approve Mr. Petrali's application for the property that is in closest proximity to his. I'm sure the two of them, if they decide to do anything bigger, can work it out between the two of themselves.
I mean, I second that. That's just a modification of your original motion, because you'd originally motioned for Mr. Petrelli to get the property in question. Now you've just added that we work with Mr. O'Brien to get the other property.
But there's been a significant delay on Mr. O'Brien's property, so I'm only making that part of the motion, so it's on the record, so Mr. O'Brien's plans cannot be delayed any further. And I know, Chris, that wasn't you, that was me. I'm disappointed we haven't heard back yet, but I think that's fine. We just need to move Mr. O'Brien's property forward as well as Mr. Petrali's. Seems like a fair situation. They're butt up to each other's property, so
I'm okay with that.
I need a second.
I got it. You got it.
Okay, we've got a motion and second. Any further discussion? Okay, would the clerk please read the roll?
Roll call. Bynum.
Aye.
Murguia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Chairman, I just want to make one comment real quickly. Mr. O'Brien, if you do not hear from anybody from the city within the next 7 working days, give me a call directly.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
We have transfers from the land bank.
We have two. We have 13050 Canaan Center Drive to the city of Bonner Springs, 244 Highview Drive, city of Bonner Springs. First on the Canaan Center property, and again, it's outlined in red. This was approved as a donation this last April. They just plan on holding on it. It's a detention pond. That's kind of really their plans. If anything future gets developed out there, they're going to deal with it. The other is 244 Highview. It's outlined here in black. This was also approved as a donation in 2017, and their plans is to donate it to the Bonner Housing Authority, which is located right adjacent to it. So we would we would ask to recommend approve for both of those.
Move to approve as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, Bynum,
Aye.
Murguia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. The last item for the land bank are donations to the land bank.
Yes, we have 3 houses that the request is from the National Community Stabilization Trust. This is a nonprofit organization with a very similar goal to kind of what we're trying to do through the land bank and the SOAR program, is to restore vacant abandoned properties to productive use. Some of the partnerships, very familiar that that are listed up there. And we'll just show a little bit about each current property. 1117 North 19th Street. This year was appraised at $24,300, is in historic West Hyde Manor neighborhood. Next property, 1869 North 30th Street. Current appraised value is just a little bit under $40,000. And 2119 North 7th Street, with an appraised value this year of $13,550. We've been in negotiations with them for some time. We've reached out to some of the contractors in our rehab pool who have been very favorable if we could get our hands on these. So we don't anticipate a problem of having them sit there. We should get these moved pretty quick. Myself and Mr. Brockman behind me, we have at least had the opportunity to go in and look in the properties, so they're in good shape. A lot better than some of the stuff we're getting out of the tax sale, but we think this is 3 properties that we can continue what we're doing through the rehab program and benefit the community.
Move to approve as submitted. Commissioner Townsend.
Commissioner Townsend?
Just a question about that property in particular that's on the screen. Since you've been in it, is that a multifamily dwelling?
I believe it's a duplex.
Duplex? Okay. That would certainly be an improvement. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion?
Need a second.
Second?
Second. Third.
Third. Roll call,
Definitely.
please.
Roll call, Bynum,
Aye.
Murguia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Last item on our agenda is the appearance of Matthew Kleineman.
Commissioner, I still have a couple more items.
Well, not on my agenda, you don't.
Let's see.
Okay, go ahead. I don't have what you're talking about on my agenda here. I do? Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Thank you for the heart attack.
Error. Not the first time, believe me. All right, tax sale, 338 properties?
Yes, well, tax sale 338. If you remember back in August, we changed the policy that said all incoming property from the tax sale would be brought before you and approved. You should have the list of those properties in your packet. This is mainly because these are how we're going to get these houses in for the rehab program. So just some information about it. We did receive them through 2 deeds, and what's specific about those is if it's a no sale at the auction, that's the first deed we get. And then anything that is bid on and not redeemed, we generally get those about a month later. So we got 161 in the first, which 17 of those were houses in the program. In the second one, we got 22 properties, and 19 of those were houses. So just have a motion to accept those property into the land bank.
Commissioner McKiernan?
I'll second, but I just want to verify if you could flip back to the previous slide, please. So in terms of the vacant lots, those are vacant lots that were, of course, just going to come immediately into the land bank and be part of our inventory for land bank.
Correct.
And in terms of the houses, those are houses that are going to come in, they're going to be under our control, they're going to be put into our rehab program, hopefully successfully rehabbed, and if not, they'll just be added to our demo list, since we would have demoed them anyway if they qualified.
Correct. We will, once we attain them or obtain ownership, and we go in and inspect them again through the assistance of Mr. Brockman. He'll then make an assessment on whether it should be rehabbed or should be demoed. If it's demoed, then we'll contact Erin out of demo, and once she makes it available to be demoed, then we'll knock it down.
So the advantage to us in terms of taking these houses into the land bank is that we control that property, and we can control ultimately what happens to it, and we can control the exterior of, we can control that property itself in terms of securing it and keeping the grounds up.
Correct. I know in previous presentations you were presented with a scenario called purgatory. Let's just say we've done away with that. So if a property makes it to a tax sale, it's either going to be bid on and paid for by someone in the public, or it's going to come to the land bank for us to take care of.
That's all I have.
We need a motion.
No, she's motion, we had a second.
Okay, roll call.
Roll call. Bynum.
Aye.
Murgia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
And lastly, real quickly, I just wanted to give you an update on the rehab program. Currently, we have 38 contractors in our pool. We have 85 houses. 65 of those are in the rehab program. Again, 20 we have determined need demo. 4 houses have been completed. We will deed over our 5th house tomorrow. 15 houses have had the rehab start, and we still have 8 that we're just waiting through for title reports and that kind of stuff to close on. We have 14 houses that have been through open house. We've had people look at it, and we still haven't received offers. We anticipate that changing shortly. And then we have 24 houses from the tax sale in August that we're just finalizing the final inspection and boarding, and then we'll have open houses hopefully by the end of the year. This one, 234 South Free, had just been completed since the last time we met, so we thought we'd give you an update. Just some simple photographs of some of the before and after. This was very interesting. This down in the basement, this was just a large pile of dirt that, you know, I think Charles is still scratching his head on why that was there. But as you can see on this is actually 2 pictures. The one here is what the contractor did to him, so definitely an improvement. There's the front of the house now. Again, it took just a little bit under 4 months to complete the rehab. This is what it was appraised. We don't have any updated appraisal information on it. And the owners, they're also living there too. They relocated from California, I like to say because of the program, but I'm sure there was other reasons they came here. So hopefully we can chalk this up to another success. But we want to point one more thing out. Charles had to go over there last week, and so the owners were there, and some of the other neighbors started coming out. This is the house across the street. Let me get my notes out. So this house is now going through a total rehab, and this is right across the street from that house. This property here has been painted, as you can see. It's literally like the opposite. The trim is now the base, and then the base is now their trim of the house we just looked at, plus a new porch installed. This property here had a new roof and was painted. One of the neighbors came down and said, "You guys are putting a lot of pressure on me to fix my house up." So we really wanted to point out that this is the benefit that we hope you guys see from this program. Is not only is it, are we taking care of the individual house, but this is starting to ripple through the existing neighborhoods. And as we continue to just grow and grow this program, then hopefully this ripple just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and we can just keep telling more of these kind of success stories to you guys. So.
Good job.
Good work, Chris. It's good to see this kind of progress being made with the land bank. It really is.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I understand this is your last standing committee with at least land bank, so I want to appreciate.
Oh, I might be buying some of these properties.
Well, we got plenty for you, but I just want to appreciate the time that you've helped out with the program, and
thank you.
Good luck in the future and stuff.
Thank you.
That's all I have for tonight.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the last item on our agenda. It's the public appearance of Matthew Kleineman regarding mobile food markets. I see we have Nozella Brown with you from Kansas State Research and Extension, the Executive Director. Welcome to you both. Mr. Kleineman, I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Okay, I'm actually going to have Nozella start, but thank you for the opportunity to come before you. I'm actually representing in my capacity the Community Health Council of Wyandotte County, and this is a project that we've been working on for a little while, the KCK Mobile Market, as it's tentatively called right now.
All right.
Okay, I have to push that. All right. Okay, I just want to start out by saying I actually grew up at the Dot, and as a little girl, I was able to go 1 block east, and I could go to the Kroger store. I could go 1 block west, and I could go to Frank's Market. Fast forward, about 15 years ago, I came back to the Dot to teach nutrition education, and I discovered that we no longer had access to the food that we thought we had. And I was teaching people to have good nutrition, and they didn't know where to find the foods that we were talking about. At that time, I joined with several agencies. Many are represented here today, with KC Healthy Kids and the Community Health, listen it up, HCW, Healthy Communities Wyandotte. Over 100 organizations have joined with me, and I represent the Food System Access Team, which we have about 25 to 50 organizations. And what we did was we knew there weren't grocery stores. You've heard a lot about that. You've heard about how poor our health is and all that, da-da-da-da-da-da. We began to look for creative ways that we could get access to food to our communities. And so tonight, I'm here really to talk to you about a proposal to help address our current UG's planning and development zoning ordinance that pertains to mobile markets. A mobile market is really defined as a truck, a large vehicle, a mobile unit that sells fruits, vegetables, meats, and other fresh and packaged grocery goods. It's usually authorized for SNAP and WIC vendors, and it regularly sells in multiple locations. They're usually like a small neighborhood grocery store, and they often sometimes focus on low income or low access communities. Otherwise, we call them food deserts, but they don't necessarily only go to food deserts. There are subtle differences between a mobile market concept and what we know as like a food truck, and I think that's where we wanna talk about that. A food truck usually is making food. A farmer's market is stationary, and both of them are referenced in their UG ordinances. But what we're finding is we really would like for you to consider amending that ordinance so that it really includes a definition for mobile markets, one that's really appropriate to the scale of the mobile market operation, and one that makes the healthy food choices more accessible to our Wyandotte County residents. Specifically, if we're to look at codes, you're going to see in section 27612 of the UG Code of Ordinances, it outlines acceptable accessory uses for zoning districts. That's C1, CD, C2, and C3, which represent planned business and commercial districts. The same acceptable accessory use stipulations apply to zoning in M1, M2, M3, and T and D, which represent industrial districts and traditional neighborhood design districts. But the current ordinance language allows for food trucks and mobile vending to operate, but only within zoning districts that are outlined above that I was talking about. For any non-commercial or non-industrial districts, a food truck or a mobile vendor must submit to the Department of Urban Planning and Land Use for special use permits. And this can really present an undue burden on this small business, such as a mobile market, because they can visit several different community locations in a single day, sometimes up to 25. This quickly becomes costly and time-consuming for the businesses and the planning department alike. We're not really suggesting that the mobile market should be exempt from the specific guidelines that are already set forth for trucks and mobile vending that are intended to ensure order and safety. We do believe that the specific conditions that apply to food trucks and to mobile vending are appropriate for the mobile markets as well. For example, your mobile markets also should be held to the standards that include not blocking sidewalks, not operating in no parking zones, not occupying parking intended for other businesses, are making sure that the trash receptacles are available and utilized, and not exceeding the hours of operation, which now they wouldn't work past 9 p.m. on weekdays or 11 p.m. on weekends. It's really the land use restrictions that we seek to address, which only allow for the food truck and the mobile vending operations within commercial and industrial zone districts. And this really makes the mobile market unnecessarily problematic, and it introduces just some additional barriers for food access to Wyandotte County residents. You have several documents that we've sent to you, and Matthew here will show you a few slides so you can kind of see what that looks like. We have actually done a lot of legwork on this. We've checked with a lot of different areas that are doing this successfully. KC Healthy Kids has actually drafted some possible sample language that we might use. And I just want you to know that you have support from several agencies that are here. We have a letter of support from the Housing Authority and several other agencies as well. So what we'd like Matthew to do is actually show you what this looks like, because when we talk about the fact that where they would be going with only, right now is only commercial or industrial zoning. So you can kind of see what that really would look like for our residents. So I'll turn it over to Matthew.
Yeah, thank you, Nizal. So yeah, this is really slides just to provide context, to give a sense of what's available. I won't belabor the point, but health access is a big part of this, what's driving it, where there's limited grocery stores where the majority of the population in the county is east of 635. We've done our legwork with community engagement. We've met over 100 residents, and this is just a summary of the categories of places they'd like to see a mobile market arrive at. It was an open-ended question, but you see that businesses are only 8.2% of those locations. That's not zoning, that's just a categorization, but it gives you a sense of where residents want to see a mobile market potentially arrive at. Mapping out for district's sake, you see in gray and red, red being commercial, you see your corridors like Quindaro, State Avenue, Central. You also see the industrial areas in gray. But the clustering of circles that are color-coded represents those locations that the community has submitted. And I just want to point out 3 of those, and this was in the packet you guys were handed. In District 1 in Parkwood, we have a good relationship with the Parkwood Neighborhood Association. We've looked at what would it be like to park around there. This is not to say that this is a location that is definitively, no, but this is one example of where the ordinance would allow for us potentially to park across the street at a commercial property that has limited parking, or down the block, which also has limited parking, which could potentially be a traffic issue, as opposed to where we could park potentially at the Parkwood shelter or at the pool with more available parking. That would not be currently allowed by our current zoning ordinance without a special use permit. Almost all of the locations would not be allowed with a special use permit, which might mean 25 special use permits for a mobile market full week of locations. In District 3, you see Cyrus K. Holiday as the example. The closest locations for a commercial district aren't necessarily well suited for that. Also, it's sometimes difficult to get there. It might be a 15-minute walk if you don't have a car or a bus route that could get you there. Whereas if we could just park at the location itself, this is multifamily, R5, RP5, and so that's a zoning consideration. Could we park in that location? For District 4, this is just showing the Douglas Sumner neighborhood. There are a number of available properties with adequate parking capacity. But when you look at what is commercially allowed for, what is industrially allowed for, certainly they're close proximity, but their adequateness isn't well situated. Parking in a vacant lot or a small gravel parking lot or at a business that doesn't have commercial parking isn't necessarily the best option for us, whereas potentially, as an example, parking at New Bethel Church or the St. Peter's Church would be potentially more appropriate. Again, this is multifamily, as just in one example. This is the ordinance specifically. Again, I mentioned special use permits. This is what we have on the books. It's basically right there. Commercial, industrial, and T&D lots are where it's currently allowed. Everything else would require a special use permit. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but Wichita has an entire chapter dedicated towards mobile ordinances. Kansas City has quite a few. It's been referred to as the Wild West, which, not the way we want to go, but there are some ideas in there that are applicable. Minneapolis actually has a really strong mobile market ordinance as well, and that's what KCK Healthy Kids referenced when they made an addendum to the current mobile vending ordinance, basically including residential as one potential area that it could be done with the exception of R1, and having a stipulation that it can't be parked close to basically a retail business that's already offering a similar product. It's not for us to say what we want exactly, but it would be nice to have an opportunity just to consider this. So just in closing, we think that better access to groceries is linked to better health outcomes. Research backs that up. Mobile markets do provide another option for food access. It can meet the community's demand of where people would go and where people live. Special use permits do represent a barrier that we view as somewhat unnecessary, considering the number of locations we'd like to serve. And a mobile market, we believe, is a low risk and no cost option for unified government to just amend their zoning ordinance. And I think that's the end of our presentation.
That's it, yes.
Thank you. And I also have additional booklets. I've handed these out in the past, but if you'd like another one, I'd be happy to distribute more.
May I ask a question?
Certainly, Commissioner, proceed.
So just to make sure that I'm clear on
Yes.
what you're asking the unified government to move quickly, with all due haste, to update our ordinance so that it doesn't require a special use permit to go to each of the locations that have been identified by people in your community engagement.
Right, and what we understand is there's a lot of nuance to what that ordinance should look like. We're not asking for that answer specifically to be determined right now. We just want an opportunity to sit down with planning and potentially legal to just go over what the options are, what's appropriate, and then that, I believe, would come back to the committee to be voted on later. Our mobile market, the KCK mobile market, as it's tentatively called right now, we're looking to launch as kind of a soft launch early next year with a full launch shortly after. So yes, we'd love the opportunity to get this resolved sooner rather than later.
And I know that you've talked with Mr. Richardson in the past about our current ordinance, and he has identified some locations where you could park right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so do I understand your presentation to suggest that even though locations have been identified, that they wouldn't be suitable or wouldn't be the best locations?
It's certainly the case that there would be locations that could be suitable, but from both meeting the community's demand for where food access could be and also adequate parking and not to be a nuisance or have a traffic issue, there are locations that would just simply require special use permits for every single location. And our hope would be that that can be amended so that it doesn't require a special use permit, though we would still have to submit that potentially as other ordinances have outlined. You still submit locations to planning and development, just doesn't require a special use permit. All of that's open to be determined through that process. We're hoping just to have that process begin.
And Mr. Richardson, aren't we undertaking an ordinance revision coming up soon?
We have the consultant under contract to rewrite the entire zoning ordinance. Last year, when the previous mobile market ceased operating, we put it on our list for that, and we've already had a discussion with the consultant about doing that. I wasn't aware of a new initiative for this until I was aware of this meeting tonight, so I haven't had a chance to see any of this until just tonight with you all. But I mean, it looks like something we could do. We weren't really going to make any zoning modifications in the interim while we're studying this, since we're going to have a lot of public involvement going. But I'm certainly not opposed to considering this and moving forward with something like this.
Is it, and I don't know what the timeline is going to be for the whole ordinance revision process, is it possible that this might be accelerated in time?
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. You know, the zoning code will probably be still 15 months away from being adopted, so that wouldn't work for what they want to do because it's a whole nother year. So yeah, if we want to do something like this, we need to move it forward in advance. And I was, you know, before the previous one went away, we were going to work on that, but when it went away, I directed the staff in other directions. I didn't know it was coming back up, or we would have already been doing that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner McGeeh.
So Commissioner McKiernan, the way I look at this is, and tell me if I'm wrong on the meeting I had with you and Rob, the way the ordinance reads is that right now a mobile market can only locate in an industrial commercial location. Well, if people could get to industrial commercial locations, then they probably could get to a grocery store somewhere. It means they have some sort of transportation. So from my perspective, they're just taking it more into the neighborhood. And since it's not full service grocery store, I didn't view it as any kind of threat to areas that have grocery stores. And I think that Matt used the example with me of Cyrus K. Holiday, which is a housing authority property, which isn't on a bus route. And those people have to walk a substantial distance to get to a bus route in Argentine to get to the Walmart and the Save-A-Lot. So when we talked, I specifically said, I'm okay with places like that. And since the majority of the tenants don't have access to vehicles and are paying large amounts of money to neighbors that do have access to get somewhere, it just is a better option. So I'm completely in favor of this. But since you're talking about revamping the entire ordinance and looking at how we distribute food in our community, I will bring up again what I brought up last year or a year and a half ago, which is what I'm concerned about. I don't mind that people set up food or meal shops as long as they're feeding people on site in an enclosed facility where somebody has the responsibility of being fed. My objection to all this food distribution is the groups that pass out things like sack lunches at a public park, just hand them out to anybody and they walk off and eat them on the way home, because what ends up happening is there ends up being trash all over the neighborhood. I have no objection to food pantries or mobile food markets. I do think the ordinance also needs to address the number of food pantries in a particular area. Now, even more specifically, with access to a mobile market, the concentration of that many food pantries in one area is a problem. So, because if they're all in one area, then they're not serving where there's a greater need at. So I don't have any issue with the mobile market and what they want to do with the ordinance. I do have an issue with passing out sack lunches, unless, like I said, they're contained. And how we resolve the issue in Argentine is they were passing out lunches in the park. Kids were taking them and they were littering all over the place. So all parks did is move them into the community center. They could sit there and eat and then leave their trash there and then leave and go home. So as long as the ordinance addresses issues like that, I'm completely supportive.
And this is a for sale mobile market, correct? This isn't a food pantry. This is a you go in and buy stuff, which is, I mean, there's some subtleties.
So it's unlikely, for example, it's unlikely, unless I'm interpreting it wrong, that you go there, buy a gallon of milk and open it up and drink it on the way home. That's different than a carton of milk. So that's why I think I'm not concerned about that issue of trash.
Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening again, Mr. Kleiman and Ms. Brown. The materials that you've shown tonight, did you say they were already sent to us? I'd like a copy of them again. They weren't in the packet that I received. Okay. To use your example with Parkwood, let's say you're geared up right now and you could roll right in to some place, but using Parkwood since you use that, what would prevent you now with regard to the codes from going there now?
Parkwood Park, the example that I'm showing, is currently zoned as R1 residential, specifically R1B.
I see, okay.
The yellow areas designates R1B.
Okay. I would so love to see this be successful. As we talked about a week ago, my concern would be that the mobile grocery go to places that has adequate parking, that there would not be obstructions to residents. Some of the hours that you mentioned, those seem kind of long to be in a residential district. Even the grocery stores aren't open as long as that. So
My understanding is that's what the ordinance already allows. It's not necessarily what we recommend, that's just how the ordinance already is.
That's in a commercial district, though.
Yeah, in commercial.
Oh, okay.
So those are kinds of things that when you specifically look at the mobile market, that you would adjust.
Okay.
Those are,
And that's what you're
That's what we're
trying to
asking
get
for.
away from, trying to
Exactly.
get away from just the restriction to commercial.
yes.
And to something that's appropriate, to your point, that it can handle the capacity. How we do that, I think, is something we still want to have that conversation about.
Yeah, because those are big issues if you're trying to get into a residential area. Make it convenient for your targeted market, but in the same instance, not making it a nuisance either inadvertently, so.
And that's the intention, definitely.
So the reason you're saying again that the permits do not work is why?
Just from the burden of a special use permit, if every location required that, that's immediately 25 locations for us in a week. That might be 25 locations that we'd like to go to. In addition, if, as has happened in the past with previous mobile markets, if a community organization calls up and said, we'd like you to come to this location in a week, we would have to get a special use permit in a week for that to be possible.
And we don't want to process 25 of those.
Yeah.
And when we were working with farmers markets, the same issue came up. Should they have to get a special permit every time they were going to operate? And we were able to relax that so that the farmers market is different than, other commercial units, so.
Does the committee have a recommendation that administration proceed with develop an ordinance that would meet the needs of the mobile food market community?
Absolutely. I think this is a phenomenal idea. I fully support it. I think you've done a great amount of legwork, and certainly the community has identified a need, and the ability to go meet that need sooner rather than later, I think, would be a great thing.
Yeah, it needs sooner finality than when we're going to do the overall zoning, and I can't believe it's that difficult to come up. Kansas City, Missouri's got, I mean, you got lots of examples, plenty of ordinances to pirate. Commissioner?
The one question I'd have about that would, let's say a proposed ordinance, this would come back to this committee. First, I would like to see that.
Actually, it would go to Administration and Human Services. That's my standing committee typically for zoning amendments. So we would go to AH&S and then to Planning Commission. I suppose that we really go to get authorization to do the ordinance from AHS. If you all make the motion, I'll speak with the chair of that committee and Doug and see if that's acceptable to move forward from you guys and not have to reschedule and go back and wait to do that, because I think I could probably have this on the January. I'm trying to think about when the notices have to go out. I don't know if it would be January or February, but it would be much sooner than if we had to go to AH&S to do that.
So how did it come to us and not to that standing committee, or did it go to that standing committee also?
It hasn't been there that I'm aware of.
They came here just based on the fact that they're talking about things that are going to be in the neighborhoods.
And
So it seemed like a reasonable place to start. This isn't an action item, so we can't necessarily take a motion and a second and a vote on it, but it certainly sounds like there's consensus from those of us who are here on this committee that we do what you just suggested, Mr. Richards.
Okay, I'll speak with the administrator about it and see if we can just move forward from there and not delay it to AH&S again.
So is the current, do you have is the mobile market, does it exist right now?
The truck exists. We're close to halfway through completion in the construction of it. We have the funding all lined up. It's just completing it at this point, and we'll be launching. We have title license. We'll be launching probably early January, mid-January.
Mr. Bynum?
When you say you're going to launch in January, do you mean that you're going to launch when the ordinance allows, or are you going to seek a special use permit for somewhere?
There's been a lot of conversations in our own team about that. The best answer I can give you is that I don't believe we'll be full service, everything's stocked. We'll be running through our paces in January. What I can tell you is that when I've met with neighborhood groups, they have asked me to come back, and I want to come back with the truck. So we're not going to be selling groceries in January necessarily, but we will be potentially handing out oranges just to get familiar with the experience, to see it firsthand. That's what the community has asked us to do. I believe our full service launch will be a little bit shortly after, possibly as soon as the ordinance is completed, if that's available.
But prior to this mobile market, there was the mobile grocer.
Yes.
And they did have a calendar and stops.
Yes.
In Wyandotte County, and there were places where they could legally be. So there are places where you can legally be right now, if you chose to.
Yes, absolutely. Our understanding, and this is, they initially brought this issue up with us, as Robert mentioned. They had 4 locations, and their challenge was they weren't always sure how to play by the rules, and they weren't always sure if the rules were what they needed to be doing. We're working with them separately to see if they can come back. It might not be coming back to KCK, it might be going just to KCMO, where they had 40 locations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we've given staff direction to proceed with this and get clearance from the chairman of the other committee. I'm confident you'll get that.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to adjourn this meeting and move to economic development and finance.
Want to move right in?
Move, I do.
Okay.
Keep it moving.
All right. So we will, as everyone is changing places here in the room, we'll go ahead and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Kleineman and Ms. Brown. Thank you both.
And thanks also to the folks here in the room who came in support of this initiative. So as we're continuing to switch over, we will go ahead and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee. Remind you that community input is welcome on any item that is before the committee. If you wish to comment on any item that's before the committee, get my attention or another of the standing committee members. I have one. And you'll have 3 minutes to make your comment at that time. We do ask that everyone here please speak as directly as possible into a microphone for accurate broadcast and recording purposes. Roll call, please. Oh. You're up.
Okay, I'm Tom Groneman for David Alvey, appearing for David.
Here.
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 What was that last one? Oh, here.
She already got her. Oh, she.
Okay. All right, so we're all here. First item of business is approve the minutes from our October 2nd meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Those minutes are approved as presented. Takes us to our committee agenda. Item number 1 is our third quarter budget revision report, and that's Mr. Reginald Lindsay.
We had one item on our third quarter budget revision report that was over $10,000. It was a $30,000 transaction within the county general fund and district courts, and it was related to sexual assaults. There was a new statute that was passed, and it allows victims to go to the hospital to get tested and to get examined. It required $30,000.
Thank you very much. And again, this is an item that's for information only. There's no action. But just to reiterate that this was budget neutral. It was just a transfer.
Yes.
Okay. Any comments or questions for Mr. Lindsay? Thank you very much for your report. That brings us to the second item on our committee agenda, and that is our third quarter budget actual report, and our CFO, Kathleen Von Atchen, will start that.
Good evening. we're going to report tonight on the revenue and expenditure performance for our general fund as well as all the other funds. So we'll start off with the consolidated general fund, which includes the city, the county, and the consolidated parks and recreation fund in total. So that total budget there is excluding an annual appropriation for debt is $205 million in fiscal 17. And as of the end of September 30th, we expended $141 million, and that was balanced by $163 million in revenue collected. So because our fiscal year is on a calendar year, through September represents 75% of the fiscal year. So you can see that at the end of the year, or at the end of September, we collected almost 80% of the revenues, which is greater than the 75%. And correspondingly, our expenditures came in at 68%, which is less than the 75%. So our collections are greater than we expected, and our expenditures are less than we expected. So we're coming out pretty good. The columns over here, by the way, are a comparison with the prior year. And just so you can see that the current activity in this current fiscal year is pretty consistent with what occurred at the same period last year. So we're going to walk you through a few of the largest funds, which are the city general fund and then the county general fund. I'm going to talk about the revenues, and then Reginald Lindsay here is going to talk about the expenditures. So the city general fund revenues, this chart shows what we've budgeted by category and then what we've spent through the end of September by those same categories and what the percentage spent was, or not spent, but collected, sorry, pardon me, revenues collected, and the amount of revenues, what percentage of the total budgeted estimate was. And then this is a comparison by all those categories with the prior year during that same period. So you can see for the city general fund, a good portion of the total taxes collected or the total revenue collected for the general fund is for $25 million of the $141 million are property tax collections. And so far through the end of September, those were 98% collected. And that's because our property taxes are collected earlier in the year, and they're all due pretty much in April and May. And so there isn't a lot of, there are some collections that take place later on in the year, but you know, for the most part, we collect all the revenue at the beginning of the year for property tax. Now for sales tax, that happens throughout the year, but we do get a big bump during Christmas, so as you would expect. Sales tax revenue is coming in at 77% through the end of September, which is higher than we expected, so looking pretty good. And given the fact that we're expecting even better sales tax revenue during those higher Christmas months of October, November, December. Other revenues, other tax is below the expected 75%. And that's mainly because in that number, there's an annual appropriation that we appropriate for debt reserves, just in case there isn't enough funds to make our debt service payments. And typically, we don't actually ever spend that because we always have, well, so far we've always had the revenues to spend it. So other key items here, which are a little larger, charges for services are down from what we expected. They're at 66%, and so we need to kind of take a look at that, but those are items that are a little bit out of our control. Most of the costs are related to the collection of trash collection fees And also the other area is municipal court fines and fees and court costs. Now, some of this difference may be a result of a delay in payment, especially with the residential trash collection charges. So overall, we're doing pretty good, 75%. On the county general fund revenue side, also we're doing really well. We're at 98%. That's because this fund, it collects property tax and it represents a greater portion of its total. The total's only $58 million budgeted for revenue in the county general fund, of which $35 million is property tax. And that, as I mentioned before, the property tax is collected earlier in the year, so we're at 98% of that. Sales tax also at 77, just like the last fund, the city fund we were at. All right, and this revenue collection is consistent with what's been shown as what we collected in the prior year for the same period. Reggie?
We have a $140 million county city general fund budget. This doesn't include the appropriation. With the appropriations, it's $151 million. Personnel category is our largest category at $102 million. Of this, public safety and public works are $100 million of this budget. A good rule of thumb is that we should have around 75% of the budget left here. So we can see the bottom line. We got 69% of the budget left, and in all the categories, we're over. We're below the 75%. So in personnel, we're 72%. Services, we're 69%. And supply, 66%. In grants and claims, we're at 15%. This is where we pay legal claims from, and also where we give a grant to the Parks and Rec General Fund. So that hasn't been done yet. And then our legal expenses are not as much as they have been in past years. So we'll have some savings there. Capital outlay is at 47%. We have a lot of spending going on right now in capital, so that number will get closer to the 100% towards the end of the year. County General Fund, we have a $59 million budget, with personnel being our largest category at $40 million. Public safety is our largest spending category as far as departments. It's a $32 million budget. And here we can kind of see mostly all these categories are below the 75% spending that we're looking for. So we can see all the categories together are 69%, with personnel coming in at 74%, right on the edge. You kind of see grants and claims are up at 80%. Here's where we grant some of our outside agencies funding. So we've paid a lot of those out this year already. And that's what we have going on there. And you can kind of see here again with capital outlay is at 50%. Departments are working hard on their capital budgets right now. So we will see that number more closely to 100% towards the end of the year. And this chart right here kind of illustrates and shows us all the other funds that we have within unified government on the revenue side and the expenditure side. Here we can see this is the revenue side, and here's the expenditure side. And what rule of thumb is we either want the revenues to come in at 75%, and we can see where most of them have come in over the 75%. And over the expenditure side, we want the revenues to be below 75%. You can see the bottom line here, there is 64%. Any questions on any of the funds?
So once again, an information only, not an action item, but bottom line is we are even or a little ahead on revenue and a little behind on expenses, which is always a great place to be at this time of year.
That's right. And we, by the way, this report is on our the Finance Department website, and you can also get much more detail if you refer to the OpenGov website in the Budget Division's part of the Finance Department website. So.
And then because there's a complete report with narrative that we all got. Now, that's going to be part of our minutes packet anyway.
Yeah,
So
that's,
everybody could theoretically have access to the report with the narrative as well as the graphs through our minutes.
well, and that's also on our website.
Excellent.
So.
Do any of the commissioners have any comments or any questions? All right. Fantastic. Thank you so very much for that report.
Good job forecasting so far.
That's right.
Yes.
I'll be watching at home on TV when you present the year-end summary.
And that brings us to item number 3 on the committee agenda. Now, this is an action item. It is a resolution for a cash management and investment policy. Ms. Von Atchen.
If I'm not mistaken, it just asks us to approve the current policy.
That is correct. There has been no change to this policy since the last time this committee and the commission voted on it.
I know it's an exciting topic, but I'd like to make a motion to approve it.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve what the recommendation of the Finance Office is. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Roll call, Groneman,
Yes, aye.
Bynum,
Aye.
Murguia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
Walker,
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye. Wonderful. Thank you so very much. That brings us to our 4th and final item on the committee agenda, and that is an update and a resolution on our GAP fund policy. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Stevens.
Good evening, committee members. John Stevens, Economic Development. If you remember, a couple months ago, we brought this initial GAP fund policy before this committee. I think there was a great discussion on it. There were many questions, a couple key questions that came out related to clarifying a little bit more related to some of the issues. And staff went back, looked at that, and then during that time, I would say that commission members and have expressed some other ways to refine and offer some suggestions to make this a more robust policy. So I'm going to walk through most of this you have seen before. This is not substantially changed except for a couple key issues that I'll highlight that were brought forward by some folks in the community. So I will just walk you through that. We're here tonight to review the revised GAP fund policy framework, provide feedback on any of the structure, and then to advance the policy to guide staff. So to refresh you again, the overview, this was established by the commission to assist with the financing and facilitation of renovations, revitalizations, and attraction of new business into the city of KCK. So a pretty broad framework. It is intended as a matching revenue program to leverage more investment into our community. And by utilizing the GAP fund, we seek to bring needed projects to the community to meet citizen needs, improve the quality of life, and make Wyandotte County a more desirable place to live and work. So the GAP fund policy, as outlined before, this is a cash loan program. However, at this point, I will note the bottom of the proposed revision to this is outlined with the exception of a residential caveat that has been added into this as a proposed change. So I wanted to note that because the rest of this has not changed from the previous presentation. This is when it is used as a cash loan program, it is a cause return related to the project on a minimum 1-to-1 ratio. All UG standards for economic development must be met to utilize this program. It must also be determined by staff as being not viable without this tool. And additionally, it must meet the need that traditional economic development tools, all of the other things in our toolbox, are just not enough to cover this gap. And then the financing must be majority private, and the caveat there, the explanation there is non-UG equity. So even utilizing other incentive tools that are UG equity. So the qualifying loan amounts, again, this has not changed from your previous presentation. We believe that the qualifying loan amount should be in the amount of $100,000 to $1 million. They must not exceed 10% of the total project cost. Total public incentives related to the project must not exceed 50% of the total project cost. So this is a GAP fund, so this would be layered onto potentially other incentive tools. Unless otherwise noted, The payback would be a cause return in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years as need determines, related to the type of project, the type of financing tools, et cetera. The payback would be set at a 0 interest rate, and the analysis shows that the gap between current market rate interest and UG bond interest was not great enough to provide a viable gap fund. So this was brought up in the discussion with this committee last time, related to, if we bond this gap fund dollars as discussed, couldn't we charge the developer in these projects a percentage of that, between the, let's say, 3.5% and 0%, somewhere in there. It really was determined in discussions with a lot of people that going to a partial percentage just was not enough to support development when the gap fund is utilized. The total gap fund issuance would be capped at $3 million. So that's the total load granted and approved by the commission of all projects that would be utilizing this. So once it reaches a cap of $3 million, we would have to stop issuing gap funds or look at the commission to expand the program, to grow the program past the $3 million cap. And then as payback is made, so as these cause return payments come back on this, that cap would, obviously the outstanding debt on that would lower, so therefore we would make new issuances, bring new projects, gap fund projects before. And then, so based on a $3 million maximum, it was asked before, what would the bonding look like? And its annual interest would approximately equal $96,000 a year if we were capped out on gap. At this point, another question that was asked, if I could editorialize a little bit, is how many projects are currently in the pipeline seeking gap fund? There have been a couple that have expressed a lot of interest in this after hearing the ED&F presentation, but there are currently there's currently one project that is, I believe, seeking specific ask to a specific tied project related to gap fund. So the fund requirements related to this would also be that soft costs related to the total project must not exceed 30% of the total project cost. Changes of 10% or more to any cost line must be approved by the county administrator. That's just good financial diligence on a development project where we have a cash outlay risk like this. All LMW requirements must be met or exceeded according to UG standards. The gap fund may not be used for operating expenses, equipment purchases, or marketing purposes for a project. And it must meet a need or service in the community that is not currently satisfied by the existing businesses in the area, or to help to significantly improve quality of life for residents. So it was also asked by this committee last time to bring back some comparisons to some other programs. And I'll say there are not a lot of apples to apples comparisons of a gap fund program like this. There are many gap fund programs out there, some administered by banks, some administered by different things. However, I wanted to bring you at least a few variable options to look at that staff found had some interesting comparison points. So Detroit, given all of their urban renewal needs and urban renewal efforts, they offer a very generalized gap fund tool of up to $750,000 per project. It's capped at 40% of project costs. So this can cover a pretty significant gap within it, and it is offered at a 0 interest with variable payback terms. North Dakota has a state gap fund program, a state authorized gap fund program that is offered to any private business that is non-agriculture. So it cannot be offered to a farm-based business. It has variable terms as well, very open to negotiable terms on that. But their caveat is it must be located in a community with less than 8,000 residents. So this one, they identified a very specific need related to underserved small towns and areas that were really underserved with traditional financing vehicles or proof of development investment. Denver offers a gap fund tool. You know, Denver generally is very thriving economically. They offer a gap fund tool of up to $350,000. Theirs is capped at 25% of project cost, but that increases to 30% if it is a minority-owned business. And the rate of return there is set at a variable rate. and that is based on many factors from what we were able to find. If it's an underserved area, it may be given the 0% cause return rate, interest rate. If it's in a area such as Lodo or some of the areas of Denver that are very thriving, but still these projects are deemed in need of a gap, it may be offered at a market rate, interest rate. So that one's unique. And then Texas has one that I hesitated to throw this in here because it's a very broad, pretty excessive one, but I thought it was worth sharing, is their Chapter 380 legislation statewide is a very broad gap fund program that can offer a loan in any amount as long as the net tax back exceeds the amount. So therefore, they base their cause return on the return of taxes back into that community or into the state over a period of time. So if that's a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year, they look at the net increase of value and they assess a payback based on what the incremental tax increase would be, and that's how they set that gap fund. So the project areas, as proposed previously, have not changed. We recommend utilizing the NRA 1, NRA 2 East, and NRA 2 East Turner. So your traditional areas there that correspond with the Neighborhood Revitalization Act areas. And the types of projects that we propose as being used for are residential. So single family, we still recommend that it must be a minimum of 5 homes, that the gap fund cash advancement is issued on a per home basis. Single family for sale homes may be issued as grants with 0 repayment to the UG. This is the new one that was brought by interested parties, was I think discussed with one or more commissioners, related to this being an additional tool within this gap fund policy that would be beneficial. So we felt that we wanted to bring this revision before this body for discussion. And then we would say that preference would be given to nonprofit existing local housing organizations. However, we would not limit it to nonprofit or local housing organizations. If a private developer were to come with a gap project that meets or exceeds the guidelines, meets or exceeds all the other need, and expressed a clear gap need within their financing, we would not necessarily exclude them from participating in this program. And then the residential single family must be new construction. So the multifamily utilization of this tool would be a minimum qualifying size of 12 units, and it may be new or rehabilitation. And then commercial must have a minimum total investment of $2 million, and it may be a real rehabilitation or new construction as well. And then finally, we still maintain that industrial projects, there are just many other tools within the industrial project array. We just don't feel that this is a tool that it really any way would be necessary for industrial projects. And with that, that is the revised gap fund policy brought back before this committee, and I would entertain any and all questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Commissioner Murguia.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of questions. It's a great presentation, and I even do development, as you know, but it's a little bit, I have some questions.
Of course.
Kind of hard to understand. So the language you use in the overview, and I'm not sure it's really important, but just so there's not any misunderstanding, it says the funding is intended as matching revenue, but yet you're only funding up to 10%. When I think of the word matching, I think of you're matching me 1-to-1.
Okay.
So I'd just caution you about that language so that there's no misunderstanding. Without looking at this, just so I kind of have an idea, are you saying that the gap fund is a loan for both residential and commercial, or is it a loan for commercial and a grant for residential?
I think what we have looked at, that the best course of action for this program from our recommendation and our analysis would be that this would be a loan program at a 0% cause return, 0% interest. However, with the exception of qualified residential single-family projects, that it could be, there could be a no repayment. So then therefore I would probably, for clarity's sake, I would qualify that as a grant gap fund component of the gap fund policy. So
why would you separate out single-family residential as as grant funding, but you wouldn't do that for commercial?
Well, I think as we looked at it, we felt like commercial and multifamily, that many of their gaps, many of the deltas that exist in many of those projects, I'm not going to speak to all of them, but in many of those, the 0% interest tool was enough. So repaying the corpus back to the unified government was something that could still be done within their pro formas, whereas the single-family residential projects, in many instances and in a couple specific instances, those numbers were just very, very difficult to coalesce even with any amount of repayment.
So what commercial retail projects have we done east of 635 that's new construction that you've been able to compare them to?
I wouldn't say we've necessarily compared, because obviously if they've been completed, they somehow found their financing, their capital stack. But within rehabilitation and construction, there have been several that I have been told from various previous staff and current staff in looking at it, that the but-for analysis, that they've just been unable to gain traction or unable to happen on the east side of our community because they're unable to close that last piece of financing. So I think we looked at it as these are the projects that have been unable to move forward or were envisioned that never came about, and we believe this tool is an additional piece that could help those projects come about.
Okay, so maybe I'm a little bit slower. I'm not sure I understand. So I'm still not clear. I have not seen so the whole point of this, I was around because I was one of the people that thought that this gap fund was a good idea before there was a gap fund. Mm-hmm. The whole point of this was to spur economic development east of 635. In the way of housing and in the way of commercial development, and not in industrial was never a conversation, because we seem to do a pretty good job at attracting industrial development. So I'm just speaking of retail and housing development. I guess what I'm saying is that since we want more of that development and it's not happening on our own with our current incentives, then why would commercial be restricted from it being a grant fund versus a low interest or a no interest loan? You're either, I guess in my mind, you're either in or you're not. I mean, and this is the problem. Maybe some commissioners have said that housing is a bigger priority, and so they want more houses built. Well, as someone that dabbles in economic development for the last decade, I will tell you, people will not locate where there are not resources and amenities like grocery stores. We've seen that when we track the population trends within our community and how people have moved out of the urban core. Even people like, not for any bad reasons, just moved out because there weren't any amenities any longer in that area. So why are we treating those two issues differently? Specifically, retail, commercial development, and single-family housing?
Well, I can tell you, we were looking at initially in crafting this. Myself and the staff were looking at how can we be as beneficial to the developers while being as conservative as possible on behalf of the unified government's bottom line. So that's where we landed at a cause return and a repayment at a 0%. That being said, I certainly would agree with you that if we very much want to spur revitalization within commercial, multifamily, and single family, moving many of the same qualifications, but then removing any cause return or repayment to the unified government and making this a true grant would certainly be a tool that I think would be highly valuable to developers of all types.
If I could just jump in real quick here. When I originally talked to Mr. Bach about this idea probably 5 years ago now, there was one specific project, as you could probably see from City Hall, that was a gap short of coming to fruition, a mixed-use project. And my original thought on this was that we would have a pool of cash that would effectively go as grants to fill gaps for projects that our team had said were worthy of having the gap filled and would spur development, and that we would have a pool of cash and we would simply spend it until it was gone, and then the next year we'd have another pool of cash and we'd spend it till it was gone. And we've kind of morphed this into borrowing this, and I'm on record as saying I'd prefer to still have a pool of cash, and if we happen not to spend it, then it just goes to our bottom line. I think that would be the ideal for me, is that a pool of cash, it is a grant, whether for residential or commercial, and that we have a finite amount of money, and projects that are eligible and meet all the criteria move forward up to the point where the fund is gone for that particular year.
Right, and I would think that the effect that that would have in the development world is knowing that there's X amount of dollars for that year, is that the projects would be, the quality of the project would become more competitive, whether it be commercial or residential. And that the reason we have people like you and other economic development staff is to determine what the quality of the project is. And you have the ability to say, we don't believe that this project meets our quality standards when we're making this level of investment. So I go back to what I said. I guess I don't understand any development. And I honestly, I haven't been over this with you. No one's briefed me on this. I've just seen this presentation. So it's always hard to have, really think it out. I guess I don't even know. I'm not a huge fan of multifamily, but I don't know why we would exclude anything. What it really is based on depends on the neighborhood, the block it sits on, the location, what the need in that particular area of our city is. It's so specialized. That's why I would just think that having something less restrictive with so many rules, with, like, as Commissioner McKiernan said, where you had a pot of money and staff would review the projects. I guess the worst thing that can happen in that is you can have all of a sudden a flood of projects come to the unified government wanting to take advantage of this gap fund. I'm not sure any of us would be heartbroken about that. Now, staff might be a little overwhelmed, but I think, in my opinion,
You'd have no complaint from me.
yeah, that's a good being overwhelmed. Then we'd need to reevaluate, hey, we're just on the cusp, we're really close. And we all know that what we do right now in the urban core is we do what I call like onesie and twosies. We do small projects because they're high risk. We all know that. I live in the urban core, I can say that. And so they're high risk. So nobody wants to take that level of risk. So we do little projects that don't create the momentum that you need to do larger scale developments. So I guess I think, and not to bring up a bad subject, but just last Thursday, we authorized $2 million in my mind in grant money to move forward with the downtown healthy campus thing. So we did just gap fund with a grant, $2 million on a project where we don't have any tenants. I've said that over and over again. This policy, if it's written, they have to come forward with tenants ready to go, ready to sign the lease, ready to move forward. You have to come forward with developers who are ready to build a house, who have financing. Why would we do one thing for this downtown healthy campus and not offer that same privilege all across east of 635, including at Midtown? And I'm saying east of 635, I probably shouldn't say that. I should use areas 1 and area 2, whatever you call them, because we did this once before, and I don't want to get too sidetracked, but this government threw millions of dollars at Indian Springs to buy it and tear it down. That was a decade ago with the hopes of something happening there. Nothing has ever happened. So now we're making it hard for people that are bringing forward real projects. They have a real deal in hand, and we're putting all this criteria on them. I guess we're very inconsistent, and we're sending really the wrong message to the public.
You know, first of all, I don't think we'll ever have east of I-35 a project that doesn't have a gap. Be perfectly honest. And if you have a gap fund that's applicable anywhere in the city, developers who see that, with few exceptions, casino, maybe the industrial, they're going to have a gap. I had envisioned, much like Brian, that we just had a pool of money, and we maybe had a few rules on an annual basis, because we don't have the money to, fund it to the extent of $10 million a year. And maybe what you have here, it's hard for me to get clear in my mind. Maybe we have two kinds of gap funds. We have this $3 million, which is a payback and basically follows all these rules, and that's available. And then on an annualized basis, we have a pool of money, and I'm going to say $1 million. I don't know what the number is. That could be, that's a budget item every year. Maybe some years you got more and you can put more in it. Maybe you got less. And the rules be less restrictive, more in keeping with what Commissioner McGee has outlined. I think the problem is we're not going to move anything forward here tonight to the full commission, in my opinion, because there's just across the board, I don't want to say dissatisfaction. It's a great attempt. Great job.
So I just want to add, and not to cut you off, Commissioner Walker, but I'd just add this. Listen, I'll be very direct, as always. I'll move this forward, and I'll tell you, my district's not going to suffer at all, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go raise private money, and I'm going to fill my gap. But unless we're going to hold long, drawn-out special sessions to throw $2 million at a downtown healthy campus, and then do stuff like that, and every project has to be a special pet political project, nobody else is going to get any money. Nobody else's job up here is to fundraise money. So I'm really hurting myself. I'd be better off to just sit here and say, okay, go ahead, knock yourself out. But nobody's coming into those areas. And the difference is, Commissioner Walker, I hear what you're saying, everybody has a gap fund, but the reality is that everybody does have a gap fund, but we're not even getting any takers in the city. You're right, all those people are getting incentives that are out west. Nobody's even looking at theirs. We've just thrown tons of money at the Northeast, and we still don't have a signed deal on a grocery store. How ridiculous.
I know, we've gone over that a dozen times already since last week and tonight, and the decision was made, and it's water under the bridge. The bottom line here is we either need to move this forward or we need to send it back, and then next month you guys rewrite, argue it over again. I don't care, but I want to do something. We're not going to decide it all here tonight.
Well, again, I'm not arguing. It doesn't, like I said, and if I'm just looking at my district, it doesn't hurt me at all.
Then good.
But
motion to move this forward to the full commission for.
So, but what I'm hearing here is that there is some thought about asking staff to consider a total grant program as opposed to loan commercial, grant residential. To be clear, although I may have envisioned a pot of money, we don't have one.
Right.
So, I mean, we still have the issue of.
No one's suggesting the amount of money increases.
Exactly.
So wherever you're getting the pot of money to give grant money to housing,
right,
it's just grant money.
But yeah, we don't currently have that cash, so it's still going to be the original
the same amount of money. Nobody's saying
to borrow that money.
Still borrow dollars.
And so, I mean, my motion would be that we ask staff to consider revisions that would make this a gap fill grant program for both residential and commercial. Commissioner Townsend?
Thank you. Here would be my objection to that. I know we have another economic development tool with a pot of money that's only $50,000 to help smaller businesses in these same areas. And we're taxing those individuals. That was supposed to be initially a true grant program, and now it's not. So if I can't even remember the name of that smaller program.
I thought we were giving away grants.
It is a grant. It's a payback.
Grant program.
No. We have a small business development grant program.
We do.
And it is a maximum of $5,000 or $10,000 per grant.
That's
I
right.
think it's, I think that's funded with the IRB abatement.
Proceeds from
fee
IRB
assessment.
sales.
That's right.
And this was a grant program. That's a
Those are for
payback. It's not an upfront
Startup business.
delivery of money. It's a payback.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the cupcake are.
That's right.
It's more for
They
starting up.
utilize
Is grant money.
It's not for a capital kind of, intensive.
Here's my question. Are those people under that program required to pay the money back or not?
Not
Because,
No, I don't, I'm pretty sure it's
okay,
not.
let's check, because that was my initial thought and understanding.
Yep.
And then later, and I won't talk about the individual situation, it was presented to them later that, no, they had to repay it. And we talked about it here, and I'm saying, well, what was the point? If they had that type of ability to raise cash, they could have done it on a credit card or gotten a loan or something else.
So
an exception
Mark-
was made. So let's check and see if that's true, because it would make no sense whatsoever to have such a small pot of money that was supposed to be a grant and was not. Seems like that the rules were changed in the middle of the stream. With regard to this situation, we've talked about it before, everybody's gonna have a gap if we make this a true grant. I thought the distinction that was made with the housing and why there was no payback requirement there, was that there are certain areas in the city where people would not build, some of these nonprofits. And so the profit potential was so much less than for a commercial. That was my understanding of the rationale for it. So I don't know that I would be in favor of these amounts of money just, being given away. Yes, we want to spur development, but I certainly want that $50,000 pot check first, because that was changed. And then that was my understanding as to the difference for the treatment in the single family here on the fund requirement page. One last question, Mr. Stevens, on the fund requirement page, where they start with, where they talk about the qualifying loans, loan amounts. Okay. As written, the cause return, explain to me what we're saying here. Some payback would be at intervals of 5, 10, 15, or 20-year terms. How would that be decided? What term applies to what?
Sure, and I can speak to both of those with your second question first. This, obviously there's a larger
Unknown participant is now joining.
Oh.
Well.
Hello?
Unknown participant is now exiting.
It was good to speak to the unknown participant this evening. So the cause return here, and I will say, obviously there are larger policy decisions, at here, and we were tasked with doing our best to create a program that was usable, workable, but really policy decisions are policy decisions that are obviously left to the commissioners. So I appreciate all the comments, and we're certainly not trying to make an onerous program or onerous outlines. We're trying to make it something that is beneficial, and we're happy to look at revisions. With that, we did want to work in flexibility, Commissioner, related to certain projects may need very little, they may have a higher ramp up on their revenues. For instance, a small commercial building that has potential tenants and leaseholds that are going to pay fair market rate once they come in, or near fair market rate for a rental, if they're coming in. So therefore, we would look at that and work with them to say, does this work within your pro forma? Would you be able to repay, if we were looking at this as a loan program, would you be able to repay your gap fund at a 5-year return? So if you complete your project and you start generating revenue on that project on day 1 of the completion, would 5 years work within your within your development calendar and your financing and capital stack to make that work? If that's unable to work, then we would go to a 10-year. If that's unable to work, we'd go to a 15-year. And really, we felt like 20-year was about the maximum that we could really fairly, because that also conforms with most other tools that we would use related to TIF or other things, to try to cap it at that 20-year, because that is pretty much the max on most tools that are available to development. So does that answer your question?
Yes. It would be on a case-by-case basis based on the market.
Absolutely on a case-by-case basis, and as Commissioner Murguia had mentioned, this is all about staff looking and determining the most viable, the most beneficial projects, and then working as closely and as fairly and open as we can with the developer to say, how can we make your project work? How can we make your project happen?
And I don't know, maybe I'm missing something on this, but in a variety of meetings, people have talked about this, in developers coming forward and having a gap, and how every developer is going to have a gap. If you've never been through a development deal with the unified government, you have no idea the rigor they put you through. And every single line item of a pro forma. So if those of you on the commission don't realize that when a developer comes forward and shows John a deal, and you can correct me, John, if I'm wrong, he looks at every single line item for what they're charging, and he wants to know specifically what that money is going to pay for and where it's going to go. Everything from lawyer fees to developer fees to whoever is going to make money. So it isn't just a random gap, and it isn't just, well, you know, sometimes it might come down to, hey, how badly do we want this business? I'm just saying, if this commission is committed to economic development in the Midtown area and in the city, we should be looking at all of the projects that are out there that can come to these harder to develop areas, and then let the commission decide whether or not it's a priority or not. And I just think that putting a lot of rules on it is only going to make it more difficult. One, when developers can go out west and not have to consider all of the details of this rule, of these rules, they're going to go where it's easier to develop. So even though there's an incentive, wading through the incentive sometimes will cost you more in lawyer fees and developer fees for wading through it than if it was more straightforward. So I'm not suggesting we give away anything to anyone, but you have to decide, and I'm not belaboring, Commissioner Walker, anything about Thursday's vote with the Health at Campus. What I'm saying is, I'm using it as an example. Are grocery stores a priority in the urban core? Well, if they are, which apparently they are because we just threw $2 million at a maybe, then we need to look at all these deals. Maybe another development wouldn't be as big of a priority. It just depends. And there's no way to know that unless they come in front of us. Right now, no one is coming in front of us. I mean, I'm getting things in my district, but I don't know the last retail development project that came to me from Commissioner McKiernan's district or from Commissioner Townsend's district. If you want to keep marching in that direction, I'm fine. That's up to you guys, but I'd kind of like to see development all over.
If I may address her other.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Townsend, your other question specifically related to the single-family homes and why that was brought. That was your question, correct? The single-family home?
Not so much that I had a question about it. That was my understanding of why the distinction was made.
Yeah, and if I could clarify that, the distinction was made specifically there, and it was brought to staff's attention, and so we made a proposed revision to this body based on that. And if I can go back here.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Well, and the reason, just if I could spend 2 seconds to explain that, the reason that single-family homes, especially for sale homes, are so difficult is they're already property tax abated in most instances in a lot of these areas. And so when they're property tax abated already, the cause return, even if it's leveraged against property tax repayment, isn't there for a period of time. So therefore, a developer builds a single-family home. They need a gap to keep that home at a price that is market rate without exceeding market rate and pricing buyers out of the market. Therefore, they brought a compelling case that said you need a gap there, but then when they sell that home, they recoup the dollars for that home, but if they have to repay the gap, they have there's no other income related their project. So that's why we do feel that single-family homes specifically, because there is no recurring income when they are a home sale. There is just no other income that comes in from that. So we did have to look at that a little separate versus tenancy, multifamily, commercial. Those have recurring income pro formas that we could look at and evaluate.
No, I agree with that. I've spoken to some people about that.
Sure.
But let me just
Yes, ma'am.
say this about the $2 million, because someone or two or three somebodies may call me and say, hey, you put $2 million in a grocery store. That was not my understanding of what we did the other day, just so everybody out there in TV land does not think that this commission has put $2 million toward a grocery store. That was to do some moving forward with some other costs for the healthy campus. In fact, the questions I asked, I think at that special session, got to a small percentage of that money in the project may have been attributed to the grocery store. But just so it's clear, we're not throwing $2 million at a grocery store, because I will get calls about that.
Okay, related to the GAP fund, there has been some discussion about potential revisions, but Commissioner Walker did have a motion that he made several minutes ago to move this forward to full commission as it has been submitted to us. Is there a second for that motion?
I'd second.
There's been a motion and a second. We'll vote on that motion. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Groneman?
Hal had a second to his, but you made a motion that Hal seconded, so that's
Yes.
the motion
Oh.
that's on the
That's
floor.
why I was confused. I agree.
You seconded mine?
Yes.
Yes.
Didn't hear you withdraw your original one, but if you withdraw your original,
It
Okay,
was never seconded, so it does.
okay, I
All
withdraw
right.
my original one.
all right.
That's right.
So the motion is that we ask staff to take this policy back, to consider modifications that would make it a grant gap fund for either residential or commercial, bring it back to this committee for further review and potential approval to move forward to full commission. Is that everyone's understanding? All right.
And you have a second from Hal.
I do have a second, yes. So what I said a moment ago, just forget all about that. Okay, roll call on this motion that we just articulated.
Roll call. Groneman?
Aye.
Bynum?
Aye.
Murguia?
Aye.
Townsend?
No.
Walker?
Aye.
McKiernan?
Aye. All right, so that has enough votes to move it back to staff for some further consideration to return to this committee.
Okay.
So, thank you very much. That's the last item. Oh, yeah, Commissioner Townsend.
With that, I would just like to request that staff look into the status of that other fund for the small ones to see currently what the status is with that with regard to a loan program or not. That was my caveat.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Commissioner,
much.
we will. Thank you.
That's the last item of business on our agenda tonight. We are adjourned.